Welcome all to the Nightman's Horror Theatre. Kick back, relax, and fall asleep to the tales from the Nightman's Book of Horrors. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. The Vanishing Room. The call came just after dawn, when the city was still wrapped in that strange, muted quiet before morning really begins. I was half awake, staring at the hairline crack running across my ceiling like a thin vein, when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. The number was familiar, but I couldn't place it. "Jameson," I answered, voice still gravel rough from sleep. "Michael?" "It's Ramos. Detective Louis Ramos, Briar Falls PD." The voice clicked into memory, sharp, dry humor, no nonsense. I'd met Ramos 2 years earlier while covering a string of runaway cases. He'd been the only one willing to give me straight answers instead of press-ready platitudes. "I've got something," he said. "Weird something. Marlowe Apartments, Unit 6B. A guy named Stephen Haller went missing last week. No forced entry. Wallet, phone, keys still in the unit. He's the 4th one in a row to vanish from that same apartment." "For in a row?" "All from 6B. I sat up. The room felt colder. "Yeah. Same MO same. Nothing. No signs of a struggle, no noise, no witnesses. And here's the kicker, each one left behind a hand-drawn map. Same basic design. Weird as hell. What's the map of? You'll have to see it for yourself. If I tell you, you'll think I'm jerking your chain." His tone was flat, he meant it. "When?" I asked. "Today. I'll clear it with the landlord. Don't take long. I've already got locals spooked." The line went dead. The Marlowe apartment sat at the corner of Ashford and Bell, a 12-story relic from the 1920s that looked like it had been designed to intimidate. Weather-darkened stone, narrow windows reflecting a winter sky, a copper roof gone the green of old pennies. The front steps were uneven, and the brass door handles were polished in the middle from decades of use. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old steam radiators and floor wax. The lobby was a rectangle of faded marble, its chandelier missing half its bulbs. Behind a scratched oak desk sat a man in a brown suit that might have been tailored for him 30 years ago, thin frame, pale skin, and fingers that twitched slightly as they rested on the desk blotter. "Ellery?" I asked. "That's me," he said. His voice was dry, unwelcoming. His eyes flicked to the notebook in my hand. "You here for 6B?" "I am," Ramos said. Ellery cut me off with a nod, pulled a tarnished brass key from a drawer, and slid it across the desk. "Don't take long," he said again. Like he'd practiced the phrase. The elevator was one of those old cages that groan and shudder as they climb. The 6th floor hallway was narrow, lined with green carpet worn to the threads in the center. Brass door numbers gleamed against dark wood frames. 6B was at the far north end. I unlocked it and stepped inside. The air had a faint metallic tang, like coins left in your palm too long. The layout was standard for the building, small living room, galley kitchen to the left, bedroom and bath beyond. Everything looked normal, almost aggressively so. Shoes lined neatly by the door. Jacket hung on its hook. A half-full glass of water sat on the counter, faint dust gathered on the surface. On the coffee table, I found the map. It was drawn on yellow legal paper in thick, dark pencil lines, a long hallway branching into more hallways, looping back on itself, ending in rows of small squares. No furniture, no windows, just endless doors. The proportions didn't make sense, rooms connected in ways that would have required bending the building into impossible shapes. The handwriting in the corner read, Level 4. I spent the next 2 days combing through missing persons reports. The first case was Lydia Foster in 1979. A 27-year-old accountant who told a neighbor she couldn't keep the hallway straight anymore. Her apartment was found locked from the inside, key on the counter. Her map showed a figure-8 hallway. Next was Alan Pierce in 1993, a postal worker. His ex-wife filed the report after he didn't show for work. His map was just a long, unbroken corridor lined with identical doors, repeating the number 12. Then in 2011, Carrie Haldeman, a night shift nurse. She'd left a voicemail for her sister at 10:42 p.m., heavy breathing, a faint tapping sound, then silence. Her map had 11 doors per side, with only the middle 2 shaded in. And now Haller, the 4th. Same eerie neatness. Same absence of struggle. Same damn map. I started talking to neighbors. Mrs. Dorian in 6A kept 3 crucifixes on her door. She leaned on her walker and whispered, "They all leave in the night. Quiet as shadows." Sometimes I hear them talking to someone, but the wall's solid. Nobody there. Nathan Cole in 6C smoked on his balcony. "When it's empty, you still hear footsteps in there," he said, jerking his head towards 6B. Slow ones. Pacing. Stops when you knock. I knocked that night. Nothing answered, but the silence felt deliberate. The basement smelled of damp stone. Carl Wicks, the building's maintenance man, led me past the storage units to a rusted iron gate. Behind it was a bricked-up archway. "Old service corridor," Carl said. "Not on any blueprint I've seen. Bricked it up in the 40s after something. Don't ask me what. Ellery doesn't like it talked about." I didn't ask, but the back of my neck prickled. By the 3rd night, I decided to stay in 6B. I brought 2 cameras, one in the living room, one in the bedroom, and enough coffee to keep me from sleeping through anything. At 1:43 a.m., I woke to faint shuffling in the kitchen. The overhead light, which had been flickering since I arrived, was glowing steady. On the footage, a shadow, no source, no body, crossed the kitchen floor. Then 3 sets of 2 knocks echoed from somewhere inside the walls. The next morning, a new disappearance hit the news. Kelly Martin, the woman subletting from Haller, gone overnight. Pajamas folded on her pillow. On the floor by her bed, another map. 13 doors on each side. Every single one marked with an X. The following night I stayed again. At 2:17 a.m., the bedroom camera glitched less than a second. When the image returned, the far wall was gone, replaced by a long, dim hallway with stained wallpaper and threadbare carpet. Doors stretched on in both directions, numbers painted in uneven black strokes, 8, 3, 17, 11, then repeating. The hallway seemed to pulse, narrowing and widening like it was breathing. The footage went black. The last night, I didn't set up cameras. I wanted to see it myself. At 2:05 a.m., the wall dissolved into that same hallway. The air smelled of rust and damp earth. Knocking came from behind several doors at once, slow, deliberate, patient. I stepped inside. The carpet swallowed my footsteps. The knock stopped. I thought the hall was curving, but it was straight, the walls were leaning inward. My breath sounded wrong, too loud. I touched a brass doorknob. It was warm. A voice whispered behind it, words I didn't know. I turned the knob. And then I woke on the living room floor, shoes dusted in fine grey powder that didn't match the building's dust. My notes were scattered. The bedroom wall was back. I left the Marlow before sunrise. A week later, an envelope came through my mail slot. Inside, the map. Crude pencil lines. Endless hallway. At the top, in handwriting I didn't recognize, were 2 words. Your hallway. The Hungry House. Full case narrative, detective's personal account. If I'd been assigned the Dunlow case 10 years later, I might have ignored my gut and filed it under missing persons, probable runaway. I might have told myself that the family skipped town to dodge rent, or that they'd turn up in a week with some flimsy story about a sick relative. But in 1983, I still believed every case could be solved if you just kept pulling at the right threads. That belief is why I'm writing this now. It's also why I don't think I'll be leaving 144 Dunlow Road again. The welfare check came in at 6:43 p.m. on a Thursday. Landlord reports tenants missing, rent overdue by 2 days. No answer to calls. Something feels wrong. The road out to Dunlow was wet from a stubborn drizzle that had been hanging around all week, the kind that makes the air smell faintly of copper. By the time I turned up the gravel driveway, the light was going grey and the trees on either side were just black, skeletal shapes against the sky. The house wasn't abandoned looking, not exactly, more like it had been worn thin. White paint flaking off like scabs, porch sagging in the middle, shutters hanging loose enough to twitch in the wind. I knocked. The sound echoed a fraction too long, like there was more space inside than the outside suggested. No answer. I knocked again. Called Sheriff's Department. Tried the knob. It turned easily. The first thing that hit me wasn't the emptiness. It was the smell. Warm, heavy, savory. Roast chicken, garlic, onions. The kind of smell that wraps around you and makes you think of home, even if it isn't yours. The kitchen table was set for 4. For plates. For glasses of water. Forks laid neatly on folded napkins. Steam curled lazily from the meat like it had just come out of the oven. Claremont's. I called. No answer. I went room to room. Upstairs, the bed's made, clothes in drawers, toothbrushes in the bathroom. Downstairs. TV remote on the couch arm, a stack of magazines on the coffee table. Garage, their sedan parked, thin layer of pollen on the hood, keys still in the ignition. No one in the house. No sign of struggle. The family, Mark and Denise Claremont, their 8-year-old daughter Holly, and Denise's mother Ruth, had moved in 18 days earlier. The neighbors said they were quiet but friendly. One neighbor stood out, Edna Reeve. 74 years old, wiry, eyes sharp as glass splinters. She was watching me from her porch when I came back out. "It's that damn house," she said, before I even asked. "Been swallowing people since before you were born." I asked her to explain. She rattled off names, the Felders, the Deeks, a man named Carl Barrett. "All gone," she said. "All left their supper sitting hot on the table." I told her it sounded like small-town rumor. "You ask Vernon," she said. "If he says he don't know, he's lying." Vernon Goss was the landlord. Ran his business out of the back booth at Dolene's Diner. He was halfway through his 3rd cigarette when I sat down. When I brought up the Claremonts, he shrugged. "Skipped on the rent." "Happens." I listed the Felders, the Deeks, Barrett. He didn't even flinch. People move in, people move out. I don't keep tabs once they're gone. "You've owned the place 20 years, I said. His eyes flicked up. "And that means I know where folks go." But his fingers were drumming the table, faster now. The old case files all said the same thing. Felder's 1979, Patricia and Henry, both 50s. Gone. No signs of forced entry. Dinner on table, roast beef, carrots, potatoes. Still warm. Deeks, 1981, Simon, Loretta, 2 kids. Gone. Casserole half eaten, steam still rising. Barrett, 1981, single male. Gone 3 weeks after moving in. Found 3 towns over, clothes soaked, muttering about rooms that weren't there before. Committed to county psych. All vanishings between 17 to 23 days after moving. All with fresh meals left behind. The Claremonts were on day 18. The county hospital smelled like antiseptic and boiled vegetables. They led me to Barrett's room, bare walls, barred window. He looked up when I said my name. "You've been in it," he said. Not a question. I asked what he meant. "It's not the rooms you see," he said. "It's the ones you don't. They show up when you're alone. They're invitations." "Invitations to where?" "To the hungry part," he said. "It doesn't want to kill you outright. It wants to keep you. Eat little bits at a time." He leaned closer. "Don't eat the food. No matter how much you want to." I didn't tell anyone I was going back. Parked on the road, walked up in the dark. Inside, the smell was stronger. The same meal, still steaming. I sat at the table, notebook open. At 1:14 a.m., I heard it, 3 slow knocks from behind the kitchen wall. Pause. 3 more. I put my ear to the plaster. Beneath the knocks, a slow, steady breathing. Brought a team in. No hollow walls, no crawl spaces. No rodent activity, no loose plumbing. One tech said the kitchen temperature was 2 degrees warmer than the rest of the house. Couldn't explain why. Voices this time. Low, muffled. Drew me upstairs. At the end of the hall, the linen closet was gone, replaced by a narrow staircase going down. The floor plan didn't have a basement. The air grew damp as I descended. The smell of food was overwhelming now. For heavy doors along the far wall. Behind one, wet chewing. Behind another, something dragging. I turned to leave. The stairs weren't there anymore. I froze. The metal moved, just enough to catch the light. I hadn't touched it. I backed toward the wall. My boot hit something soft. I looked down, a child's shoe. Pink canvas, little daisy pattern. Holly Claremont size. I picked it up. Warm. I heard a whisper then. Not through the doors, behind me. I spun the light around, but the far end of the basement was swallowed in shadow. The beam wouldn't stretch that far. Another whisper. This time, words. "Come eat before it gets cold." I ran my hands along the wall, searching for the stairs, for anything. My fingers caught on a seam, a door frame. It opened without resistance. On the other side was the Claremont's kitchen. Same roast chicken. Same 4 plates. Steam curling up in slow, lazy ribbons. Only, it wasn't the kitchen I'd entered from upstairs. The angles were wrong. The table was longer. The windows looked out onto absolute black. I stepped inside anyway. The smell wrapped around me like a blanket. My mouth watered. I hadn't eaten since morning. One of the plates, Holly's, had a little blue plastic fork beside it. The chicken meat was glistening, perfectly golden. I remembered Barrett's warning, don't eat the food. I stepped back. My heel hit something. When I turned, I saw a second table in the shadows. This one had 5 plates. The 5th plate was empty, but the napkin was folded exactly like mine. That was when I heard the chewing again. Not from the plates. From beneath them. The table's surface rippled, subtly at first, then more violently. The legs seemed to stretch, roots pressing into the floor. I backed toward the door. It wasn't there anymore. The chewing grew louder. Closer. The plates began to sink into the table like stones in water, vanishing one by one, the roast chicken sliding down into the darkwood as if the table was swallowing it. When the last plate disappeared, the chewing stopped, and something underneath the floor began to move toward me. The movement under the floor was steady and deliberate, like something dragging itself along in mud. I pressed my back against the wall, scanning the warped kitchen for another door, another seam in the shadows. Nothing. The smell was still thick, too thick. It wasn't just roast chicken anymore. There was something sour beneath it, like meat that had been kept warm too long. Then the boards under my feet flexed. Just a little at first, the kind of give you get in an old house. But then again, and again. Closer. I stepped onto a chair to get off the floor. The legs creaked under my weight. That was when the voice came back. Same tone as before, same coaxing warmth. Come eat before it gets cold. The voice wasn't coming from the table this time. It was coming from inside my head. Not as a thought. Not exactly as a sound, either. It was like a memory someone else had put there. A memory of being called to dinner by someone I loved, but I couldn't picture their face. The board split in the center of the room. Just a hairline crack, but wide enough for a breath of hot air to curl through. The air carried the smell of the roast, stronger now, almost unbearable. My stomach cramped with hunger. The crack widened. Something pale and wet pushed through, not a hand, not a foot. More like the knuckle of a finger, but the size of a dinner plate. It flexed once, twice, then withdrew. The board sealed over it again. A chair slid across the floor, slow and scraping. It stopped at the head of the table. I didn't sit. Instead, I started testing the walls again, pressing along the seams, looking for the door I'd come through. My fingers brushed a metal latch. I yanked it open and stepped into the basement again. The 4 doors were still there, but now one of them, the second, stood slightly ajar. The air leaking from it was warm, humid. Inside was a narrow room, lit by a single naked bulb. And against the far wall, the Claremonts. Mark, Denise, Ruth, Holly. All seated at a table just like the one upstairs. All unmoving. Their eyes followed me as I stepped in. Not wide, not fearful. Just aware. Mark's mouth opened, slow, deliberate. His voice was flat. It's easier if you don't fight. Denise's head tilted in a way that wasn't quite human, too slow, too even. You'll be hungry soon. Holly reached out a small hand, palm up. Her skin was grayish, almost translucent. I could see something pulsing under it. Ruth didn't move at all. But her shadow on the wall behind her shifted, a slow ripple, like water disturbed. I backed toward the hall. None of them got up. As soon as I stepped into the basement corridor, the door slammed shut behind me. The light went out. In the dark, the chewing started again. Only now it was all around me, behind each door, above me, beneath my feet. The air was heavier now, harder to breathe. And then I felt it, the slow pull at my ankles. I shone my flashlight down. The beam caught the floor, or what should have been the floor. Instead, I was standing on something that looked like wood but moved when I shifted my weight. It swelled slightly under my boots, as if pushing up toward me. I tried to run, but my right foot sank an inch. Then two. The boards, if they even were boards, tightened around my ankle like a fist. The flashlight flickered. In that split second of dim light, I saw shapes under the surface, pale, half-formed faces pressing upward, mouths open, eyes closed. I yanked hard, breaking free, and stumbled toward the far end of the hall. Another door appeared where there hadn't been one before. I didn't care. I opened it. Inside was the street. Bright daylight. My patrol car parked at the curb. Relief hit me so hard I almost fell to my knees. I stepped forward, and the sky folded in on itself. The blue turned black, the trees bent inward, and the air was suddenly warm and heavy again. When I looked down, I wasn't standing on asphalt. I was standing in the Claremont's kitchen. The table was set for 5 now. The 5th plate was full. Steam curled from the meat. The smell was intoxicating. I reached for my radio. It wasn't on my belt anymore. Neither was my gun. My flashlight was gone too. The only thing in my hands was a fork. The voice came again, this time closer, right at my ear. Eat. I told myself I wouldn't. I told myself Barrett had resisted, so I could too. But when I looked down, the fork was already halfway to my mouth. The chicken was perfect. Warm. Juicy. The best thing I'd ever tasted. The second bite was even better. The third better still. By the 4th bite, I could hear the chewing again, but not with my ears. I could feel it, deep inside me, matching the rhythm of my own. When the plate was empty, I looked up. The other 4 at the table were smiling. I smiled back. I don't know how much time has passed since then. Sometimes I think it's been a day. Sometimes years. But the food is always hot. And now there's another plate on the table. Steam curling. Waiting. For you. The Ashford Hollow Murders. By M.B. It had been raining in Ashford Hollow for 3 straight days. Not the kind of gentle drizzle you could ignore, but the relentless, soaking kind that made the soil bleed into the gutters and turned the air heavy with the smell of rot. At 6:42 a.m., a call came into the Hollow County Sheriff's Department. The voice was male, shaking. I think I found a body. Deputy Claire Morton was first on scene, a narrow, unpaved trail behind the derelict Red Willow Mill. She parked the cruiser in a splash of mud and stepped out, pulling her collar up against the rain. It took her 30 seconds to see it. A woman, mid-20s, sprawled in the reeds. Her skin was the color of old wax. Mud caked her bare feet, and her hair, a tangle of black, fanned across the ground like spilled ink. Her eyes were still open, and carved into the side of her neck, faint but deliberate, was a single word, hollow. Ashford Hollow wasn't the kind of place you stumbled upon. It sat in a forgotten corner of North Carolina, tucked between pine-choked hills and the sluggish curve of the Wexler River. The main street was 6 blocks long, lined with brick facades that hadn't changed since the 1950s. Locals called it the Hollow, but outsiders just didn't come here anymore. The textile mill shut down in '93, and the last big employer, a furniture factory, closed 2 years later. Jobs dried up, houses sagged, and people learned to keep their heads down. But the one thing Ashford Hollow still had was gossip. Everyone knew everyone else's business, or at least thought they did. When the first body was found, the town buzzed with whispers before the sheriff's office even released her name. Her name was Marina Blake, 26 years old. Waitress at the Hollow Diner. No criminal record. Lived alone in a small rented apartment above the hardware store. She was last seen leaving work around midnight 3 nights earlier. The rain hadn't just washed the streets clean, it had erased most of the evidence, too. Sheriff Dan Holden called in the state crime lab. The autopsy confirmed drowning as the official cause of death, but the coroner noted ligature marks on her wrists and ankles, suggesting she'd been restrained at some point. The carved word hollowed had been done post-mortem. By the second day, Holden's team had mapped Marina's last movements. She'd closed up the diner at 11:54 p.m., walked 3 blocks toward her apartment, and vanished. That was when Deputy Morton noticed something strange. 2 years earlier, another young woman, Allison Kerr, had disappeared. Her body was never found, but she was last seen in the exact same stretch of road. The connection didn't officially matter until the second body appeared. It was found 11 days later, at the edge of the Wexler River, snagged in a tangle of branches. Rebecca Sloan, age 23, part-time college student. The same ligature marks. The same post-mortem carving. Now it wasn't gossip. It was fear. Women started locking doors, walking in groups, and avoiding Main Street after dark. Holden formed a joint task force with the State Bureau of Investigation. They built a victim profile. Young women ages 20 to 26. Last seen alone at night. No sign of sexual assault. Post-mortem staging with a hollow E carving. The unknown subject appeared organized, methodical. No fingerprints, no usable DNA, no witnesses. Then came the break. On the night before Rebecca Sloan was found, a gas station attendant had noticed a dark blue 1989 Chevy pickup parked across the street for over an hour. The driver wore a baseball cap pulled low, and when asked if he needed help, he simply drove away. The station's camera was ancient, the footage grainy, but you could make out part of the license plate, 7K9. Investigators traced the partial plate to 43 possible vehicles in 3 counties. Number 22 on that list belonged to Earl Danner, 41, a lifelong Hollow resident with a history of petty theft, trespassing, and 1 charge of animal cruelty that had been dropped. When detectives visited his property, they found the truck under a tarp in his barn. The tires matched impressions found near Marina Blake's crime scene. But Earl had an alibi. He was at a fishing cabin with his brother the night Marina vanished. His brother confirmed it. Holden didn't buy it. Earl Danner lived alone on 5 acres of overgrown land at the edge of the hollow. He was quiet, awkward, and seemed to avoid eye contact during questioning. His home was neat to the point of sterility, no personal photos, no decorations. Just clean surfaces and locked doors. A search warrant turned up rope fibers consistent with the victim's restraints, but without DNA or direct evidence, it wasn't enough to charge him. Then, 3 weeks later, another woman went missing. Angela Hart, 24, had been leaving her night shift at the county hospital. Her car was found still in the lot, driver's door unlocked. Holden gambled. He put Earl under 24-hour surveillance. On the 5th night, just after 1 a.m., Earl drove his truck to the old Red Willow Mill, the same place Marina's body had been dumped. He carried something wrapped in a tarp to the river bank. When officers moved in, Earl didn't resist. The tarp held Angela Hart, alive, barely conscious, bound at the wrists and ankles. She was rushed to the hospital. Earl was taken into custody. In interrogation, he said little at first. But over 12 hours, he began to unravel. The killings, he claimed, were a cleansing. He believed Ashford Hollow had become corrupted and that he was removing the rot. The word carved into the victims was meant as a mark of truth. Earl confessed to Marina Blake and Rebecca Sloan, but denied involvement in Alison Kerr's disappearance. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The prosecution leaned on forensic matches, rope fibers, tire impressions, and microscopic soil comparisons from Earl's property. Angela Hart's testimony was devastating. She described waking up in Earl's home, tied to a chair, while he calmly explained that it wouldn't hurt much. The defense painted Earl as mentally ill, arguing for life in a psychiatric facility instead of prison. The jury took less than 4 hours to return a verdict, guilty on all counts. Earl Danner was sentenced to death. Ashford Hollow has a way of swallowing things. The mill still rots by the river. The rain still falls in long, unbroken days. People talk less about Earl now, as though ignoring the past might erase it. Angela Hart moved away. So did Rebecca Sloan's parents. But every so often, when the Wexler River floods and the fog rolls low, someone swears they see something moving at the mill, a figure in a baseball cap, watching from the reeds. And every so often, another young woman disappears. The Cold Pines. The Cold Pines forest had a way of swallowing sound. Even in summer, the air was heavy and damp, muffling footsteps, muting voices. But in winter, when snow covered the ground in thick drifts, it was as if the entire world outside those trees ceased to exist. On February 2nd, 1999, the only sound for miles was the crackle of fire. The cabin sat deep in the woods, 10 miles past the last maintained road. It belonged to Thomas Hale, a logger, hunter, and sometimes trapper. The flames were already through the roof by the time the first responders arrived. The snow reflected the orange glow, turning the trees into black silhouettes against the light. Fire crews worked in silence, their shouts absorbed by the pines. When it was over, all that remained was a blackened shell and the smell of charred timber. Inside, they found a single body in what used to be the living room. The man's head was fractured. The coroner would later confirm he had been dead before the fire ever started. The file would call it homicide, case #99-017, but around town, people just called it the cabin fire. The Hale property was remote by design. Thomas Hale had built the cabin himself in the late 80s, hauling lumber out there by truck and sled. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. The only regular visitors were hunting buddies and the occasional drinking partner. Hale himself was not a man well loved in Grey Ford, Maine. He had a reputation, heavy drinker, short temper, and a history of getting into bar fights. He had 2 failed marriages behind him and no children. The night before the fire, Hale had been seen at the Timberline bar. Witnesses said he was already drunk when he arrived. He sat alone for an hour before a young woman joined him at his table. She was described as mid-20s, dark hair, wearing a green jacket. She stayed for 2 drinks, then left. Hale followed 15 minutes later. The scene. The cabin had no signs of forced entry. The front door was unlocked, though partially burned. The accelerant used, gasoline, had been poured in a trail from the doorway into the living room. In the snow outside, investigators found one odd detail, a single boot print about 30 feet from the front porch. The snow around it was undisturbed, as if the person had stepped there and vanished. No other footprints were found, not even Hale's. The autopsy. Dr. Marcus Kessler determined cause of death to be blunt force trauma to the skull, likely from a heavy, narrow object. Estimated time of death, between 9:30 p.m. and midnight on February 1st. Kessler also noted bruising along the victim's right forearm, consistent with defensive wounds. The fire had been set between 30 minutes and an hour after death. The leads. The only vehicle tracks in the snow belonged to Hale's own truck. The truck itself was gone, never found. The woman from the bar was never identified. By August of 1999, the investigation had gone cold. Hale had no known enemies with motive strong enough to kill, no family close enough to know his habits, and no paper trail worth following. The file was boxed, labeled, and shelved. By 2019, most people in Greyford barely remembered Thomas Hale. The cabin was just a ruin in the woods now, half collapsed and overgrown. Hunters passed it on the way to deeper trails, some claiming it was haunted, others saying nothing at all. The town had changed, new houses, new faces, but the pines were the same. Detective Sarah Whitlow didn't grow up in Greyford. She'd transferred from Portland PD after a messy divorce and a burnout year working narcotics. She liked the quiet. The cases were smaller here, stolen snowmobiles, the occasional domestic dispute. But in the summer of 2019, the department began a cold case review program, and each detective was told to pick a file. Sarah picked Hale's. She told herself it was random. But the truth was, there was something about that single boot print in the snow that lodged in her mind and wouldn't let go. The file was thin. For photographs of the scene. A witness statement from the bartender at the timberline. Autopsy notes. Gasoline residue analysis. Sarah read it 3 times before noticing the gaps, questions never asked, or at least never recorded. The woman from the bar had been described in detail by 2 patrons, but no sketch was made. The boot print was noted but never matched to any known size or brand. And most strangely, the incident report listed Hale's truck as a missing, presumed stolen, but contained no record of a search beyond the first week. Sarah decided to start with the woman from the bar. She went through 1999 DMV records, cross-referencing with all female drivers in the county who owned red sedans. There were only 2. One, a schoolteacher named Janine Keller, had been in Florida that winter. The other was Elena Morris, 26 at the time, a bartender at the Timberline. Elena had given a short statement back then. Yes, she knew Hale a little. Yes, they talked at the bar that night, but she left alone and hadn't seen him since. Elena died in 2003. Single car accident on an icy road. The police file on her death was only 2 pages long. Sarah drove out to the accident site. Even 16 years later, the skid marks were still faintly visible under layers of repaved asphalt. The curve was sharp, but not sharp enough to explain a fatal crash for a sober driver going the speed limit. The crash happened at 2:14 a.m. Toxicology results were missing from the file. The reporting officer? Deputy Carl Jennings, the same deputy who had been first on scene at the Hale cabin. Jennings retired in 2004 and moved to Florida. Sarah found Jennings in a small house outside Daytona. He was 74, wiry and wary. When she mentioned the Hale case, his jaw tightened. That was a long time ago, detective. Let it stay that way. But Sarah pressed. She told him about the missing toxicology report in Elena's file, about the boot print, about the woman in the bar. Jennings stared at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "Sometimes the truth ain't worth what it costs." Sarah didn't move. She let Jennings sit with the silence, the Florida ceiling fan creaking overhead. Finally, he sighed, rubbed his face, and looked at her the way someone looks at a storm on the horizon, knowing it's coming whether they want it or not. "You're right," he said. "It was Elena." According to Jennings, Elena had been seeing Hale casually in the months before his death. At first, it was harmless, drinks, late-night drives. But Hale had a temper. When he drank, that temper became dangerous. On February 1st, 1999, Hale showed up at the Timberline already drunk. Elena served him 2 more beers before telling him to call it a night. He didn't take it well. They argued, and to avoid a scene, she offered to drive him home. Jennings's voice dropped. She called me about an hour later. Said he'd tried to force himself on her in that cabin. She fought back. Hit him with the poker by the fireplace. Jennings drove out there himself. Found Hale dead on the living room floor, blood pooling beneath his head. Elena was in shock. She was young. Scared. I'd known her since she was a kid. I wasn't gonna let her life get swallowed up by his. So Jennings told her to go home. He stayed, poured gasoline through the cabin, lit a match, and left. The boot print? He'd stepped out to check the road before lighting the fire. Sarah leaned forward. And for years later, Jennings's eyes went flat. She was drinking hard by then. I guess the guilt ate her up. Called me late one night, said she couldn't sleep without seeing him in the fire. That night she went off the road. He didn't say more. He didn't have to. The implication was clear. Jennings hadn't just helped Elena after Hale's death. He'd been there at the end, too. Whether her crash was an accident or not, Sarah knew she'd never prove it. Back in Maine, Sarah wrote up her findings in a 12-page report. It wasn't enough for a prosecution. Jennings was old, Elena was dead, and the statute of limitations didn't apply to murder, but the evidence was gone. Still, the file was officially marked closed, death of suspect. It didn't feel like closure. Not really. 2 months later, Sarah took a drive out to the ruins of the Hale cabin. The pines were silent, heavy with snow. The charred remains of the walls still stood like black ribs against the white ground. She walked the perimeter, crunching through the frost, until she stopped. 30 feet from the porch, half buried in the snow, was a single, fresh boot print. No other tracks. No sign of anyone else in the forest. That was the moment she understood something Jennings had said in Florida. Sometimes the truth ain't worth what it costs. Because some truths don't end, they just wait in the snow, one step at a time. The Widow's Ledger. The day Marla Denton found the ledger, the sea was the color of old pewter and the wind had a bite to it. She had been in her late aunt's house for nearly 2 weeks, sorting through decades of clutter in preparation to sell it. Breakwater Street was a row of aging clapboard houses in Port Camden, Oregon, each facing the Pacific with a kind of stubborn endurance. Aunt Thelma had lived there for 50 years, outlasting 2 husbands and most of her friends. The obituary in the Port Camden Sentinel called her a fixture of the community, but Marla knew her aunt as a woman of secrets. Thelma didn't talk much about her past, and when she did, her stories were often inconsistent. On that blustery afternoon, Marla was stripping paint from the upstairs bedroom when the scraper caught on something soft in the wall. The plaster there was thin from water damage. She pried away a section and found a narrow space between studs. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a book. It wasn't a diary. It was a ledger. The cover was cracked black leather, smelling faintly of mildew and old smoke. The first pages were neat lists of names, dates, and amounts of money. But every few entries, there were short phrases written in block letters. Finished at the docks. Slipped on the rocks. Accident by the cliff road. Marla's heart began to hammer. These weren't random notes. They read like obituaries without the sentiment, and the earliest dated back to 1968. Marla had grown up in Port Camden but left at 18, promising herself she'd never get trapped by its slow decay. She became a research assistant at the State Historical Society in Salem, which was why she noticed something strange almost immediately. The names in the ledger matched names she'd seen in old newspaper archives, people who had died in odd, sometimes unexplained circumstances. The amounts next to each name weren't small. Some were in the thousands, huge sums for the 70s and 80s. They weren't deposits, either. The ledger seemed to record payouts. That night, she sat at the kitchen table with a pot of coffee and cross-referenced 10 names from the book against online archives. 8 of them had obituaries describing tragic accidents. One was listed as a victim of a random assault. Another simply died at home unexpectedly. Marla took the ledger to the Port Camden Police Department the next morning. Detective Caleb Reeve had been with the department for 23 years, most of them spent on burglaries and small-town disputes. The ledger unsettled him in a way he didn't show. He flipped through it slowly, stopping at certain entries, his thumb hovering over the neat handwriting. "You find this in Thelma Prine's house?" he asked. Marla nodded. Reeve gave a small exhale. "I knew Thelma. Everyone did." He closed the book carefully, like it might fall apart if handled too rough. "All right, Ms. Denton. We're going to keep this for evidence. But I think you'd better tell me everything you know about your aunt." 2 weeks later, Reeve called Marla back to the station. In that time, he and his partner, Detective Yanel Caree, had identified 23 names in the ledger. The first was Marty Elkins, dock worker, drowned in 1968 after falling between 2 more trawlers. The second was Clara Barnes, 32, who slipped from the cliff road in 1970 when her brakes supposedly failed. The third, Harold Dunn, died in a fire at his workshop in 1972. The fire marshal at the time had called it an accident caused by an unattended propane heater. But as Reeve explained, the payouts next to the names often went to people with a financial interest in the victim's death, spouses, business partners, even siblings. "This isn't a list of people who got rich," Reeve said. "This is a record of contract jobs. Paid killings." Marla felt her mouth go dry. "You think my aunt was involved?" Reeve didn't answer directly. The earliest payments are in someone else's handwriting. But by the 80s, it's hers. The more they studied it, the more a pattern emerged. The payouts were always within 2 weeks of the death. They were always even amounts: $1,000, $3,500, $5,000, never odd numbers. Every few years, a payment was marked advance, always to the same initials, CK. Reeve's partner, Caree, dug through Old Town records until she found a name: Clifton Kane. He had worked maintenance at the cannery in the 70s and 80s, then disappeared from public record around 1990. No death certificate, no forwarding address. But in 1989, a ledger entry recorded: CK, final settlement, $12,000. Finding Clifton Kane was like chasing smoke. Reeve and Caree worked through old property records, union rosters, even high school yearbooks. The man's last trace in Port Camden was a tax record from 1989, the same year Thelma's ledger paid him a final settlement. It wasn't until Caree dug into out-of-state fishing licenses that a hit came back: a Clifton R. Kane, registered in 1992 to a tiny charter operation in Crescent Bay, California. The license expired in '94. No renewal. Reeve's hunch was that Kane wasn't dead, he'd just gone underground. While Caree traced paper trails, Reeve made the rounds in Port Camden, talking to the oldest locals. The same name kept coming up. Cliff Kane? Mean bastard. Worked hard, drank harder. Rumor was, if you had a problem, he could fix it. For a price. An old fisherman named Darby Wilkes leaned in close at the mention. He and your aunt were close. Real close. But you didn't go around asking what they did together. The case shifted from cold history to active homicide on an overcast Tuesday in March. A 68-year-old man named Leonard Pike was found dead in his workshop. Heart attack, the coroner first thought, until Reeve noticed the discoloration around the lips. Toxicology confirmed it. Pike had been poisoned with cyanide. At first, it didn't make sense. Pike was a retired insurance adjuster with no known enemies. But when Reeve ran his name against the ledger, his pulse quickened. Pike had been the claims officer on 3 suspicious insurance payouts in the 1980s, all victims named in the ledger. Someone was cleaning house. The cyanide used on Pike was traced to an old bottle manufactured by an industrial supplier in the 1980s. Sales records? Long gone. But Curie found something better. The glass bottle had once held a custom-ordered batch, stamped with a lot number. That lot number matched a bottle found in a police evidence locker from an unsolved poisoning in Crescent Bay, 1993. The prime suspect in that case? Clifton Kane. Reeve knew they needed Kane alive before more names in the ledger turned into corpses. They followed a string of small purchases, cash-only hardware store runs, marine supply shops, all in coastal towns between Oregon and Northern California. Then, one rainy night in April, a break came from the harbor patrol in Astoria. They'd logged a suspicious trawler tied up in a private slip. Registration expired, but the name on the old paperwork was Kane's. Reeve and Curie drove down in the dark, the rain sweeping across the windshield like sheets of grey glass. They found Kane sitting on the deck, smoking, his face carved deep by years and weather. He didn't look surprised to see them. "You took your time," he said. Kane didn't deny the ledger. In fact, he seemed amused by it. "I kept the early books. Your aunt took over when I wanted out. She had a head for the business, cleaner than me. We handled problems. Jealous husbands, greedy partners, folks who got in the way. The advance payments. Retainers," he explained. "Someone paid up front, we held the credit until they needed something done." "Why kill Pike now?" Kane's eyes went flat. "Loose ends. I was tying them off." It was Curie who caught it, the way Kane talked about the ledger's last few entries. The handwriting wasn't Thelma's. It wasn't Kane's either. When they compared samples, the last 3 payouts, including Pike's, were in Marla Denton's handwriting. Reeve stared at the page. "You didn't just find that ledger, did you?" Marla, brought in for questioning, didn't flinch. She said she'd discovered it while cleaning, yes. But she'd also started digging through the names and found people she believed deserved punishment. Pike was first. She'd been planning more. The real twist was that Kane hadn't killed Pike at all. He'd come back to Port Camden to retrieve the ledger and shut the whole operation down before someone else misused it. Marla had beaten him to it. She'd used old cyanide she'd found in the attic, part of Kane's leftover stash from decades earlier, to kill Pike. She'd planned to make it look like the work of the old conspiracy, forcing police to chase ghosts. Reeve arranged a meet between Marla and Kane under surveillance. She thought they were going to exchange names from the ledger for cash. Instead, they recorded her admitting to Pike's murder and to researching future targets. She was arrested on the spot. Kane, with no active warrants that would stick after so many years, walked free. but he left Port Camden that same night, his trawler slipping into the fog. The ledger was sealed in the evidence room, marked for indefinite retention. Marla Denton took a plea deal, 25 years. She never spoke about the other names she'd planned to cross off. And somewhere out on the water, Clifton Kane kept moving, the weight of decades behind him. One rainy evening, months later, Reeve received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet torn from the ledger. On it was one line, in Kane's handwriting. Caleb Reeve, final settlement, TBD. The ferryman of Coldwater Creek. On December 3, 1998, the body of 13-year-old Samuel Rooker was found snagged against the half-frozen debris at the bend of Coldwater Creek, just outside Blackford, Montana. The coroner would later say he'd been in the water for at least 2 days. His shoes were missing. His pockets were empty. His eyes were open. The sheriff at the time, Dan Collier, told the local paper it was a tragic accident. Sam's mother never believed him. In 2023, investigative reporter Leah Horn returned to Blackford for her father's funeral. Leah had grown up here but left after high school, carrying the weight of small-town secrets she never unpacked. On her second night back, she ran into Maggie Rooker, Sam's mother, outside the grocery store. Maggie was older, gaunter, but her eyes burned with the same restless anger. "They're saying your dad died in his sleep," Maggie said quietly. "That's not what happened to Sam either. They lied to me. They lied to everyone." Maggie handed Leah an envelope. Inside were photocopies of old sheriff's reports, water-damaged and faded, with sections blacked out. Scrawled in the margin was a note. "Ask about the ferryman." Leah remembered the name from childhood. The ferryman was a local boogeyman kids whispered about. According to the stories, he lived under the old railroad bridge and collected tolls from anyone foolish enough to cross Coldwater Creek at night. The toll was never money. It was something personal, a photograph, a piece of jewelry, a shoe. Sometimes the ferryman let you go. Sometimes he didn't. It was the kind of rural folklore Leah had always assumed came from bored kids and long winters. But Maggie's voice when she said the word made her stomach knot. The old reports detailed 3 other deaths from the late 80s to late 90s. 1988, Claire Bostwick, 17, found downstream from the bridge, missing her left sneaker. 1993, Hank Ledbetter, 22, drowned on a warm August night, wallet gone. 1998, Samuel Rooker. In each case, the body was found with something missing and no witnesses came forward. The official cause of death for all 3 was accidental drowning. But Leah spotted something else. The same deputy's name appeared on each case, T. Winslow. Leah drove out to the railroad bridge the next morning. It was rusted, sagging, and officially condemned. Coldwater Creek slid black and sluggish beneath it, ice crusting at the edges. On one of the bridge's supports, half hidden under layers of graffiti, was a carving. FP 1998. She took a photo and sent it to Maggie. Maggie called immediately. "FP. That's Freddie Pike. He was with Sam the night he died." Freddie Pike was still in town, working odd jobs and living in a trailer at the edge of the woods. His eyes darted like a trapped animal's when Leah asked about Sam. "We were just messing around," he said. "We dared each other to go to the bridge. He went down to the water to get something. I stayed up top. Next thing I know, he's gone." When Leah pressed, Freddie's hand shook. "You don't get it. The ferryman don't like being watched. You talk about him, he comes for you." Digging through newspaper archives, Leah learned that Sheriff Dan Collier, the man who'd ruled Sam's death and accident, had once been investigated for evidence tampering in another case. He'd retired quietly in 2000 and moved away. When she tracked him down in Idaho, Collier refused to talk until Leah showed him the files Maggie had given her. His face went pale. "That's not for you," he said. "That's for the river." Before she could ask more, he shut the door. 2 weeks into her investigation, another body turned up in Coldwater Creek. This time, it was a man Leah didn't know, a drifter, according to police. Cause of death, drowning. Missing, 1 boot. Deputy reports were eerily similar to the old cases, right down to the location. Leah realized the missing items weren't random. In each case, they were always from the victim's left side, left shoe, left earring, left glove. Maggie said something that stuck: the ferryman only takes what is owed. Half your soul. The left half. One night, Leah returned to the bridge with a flashlight and recorder. She placed one of her own sneakers at the edge of the water and waited. An hour passed before she heard it, slow, deliberate footsteps on the gravel. A figure emerged from the shadows under the bridge. Tall. Coat dripping water. The smell of river rot in the air. Leah's recorder captured her own voice saying, "Who are you?" The reply was low, almost kind, "Tolls already paid." Then the flashlight went out. Leah's rental car was found 2 days later, empty, door open, keys still inside. Her left shoe was gone. Maggie Rooker keeps the rest of her notes in a locked drawer. She doesn't tell people about the ferryman anymore. In Blackford, people learned to stop asking. Coldwater Creek still runs black in winter. And sometimes, on the nights when the ice groans, folks say you can hear slow footsteps on the gravel under the bridge.